An introduction to Australian Impressionism. Australian Impressionism was an art movement in Australia from the 1880s to the start of the 20th century. It borrowed ideas from French Impressionism, which was popular in Europe and North America in the 1870s and 80s. Impressionism was all about capturing light and colour in landscapes, a feeling of a place, or an impression. To record these impressions in paintings, Impressionists used a method called plein air, French for open air, in other words, painting outside. In the past, artists would usually make sketches and small paintings on plein air, but would take these back to their studios and could take months to create large-scale, detailed and realistic paintings. Because plein air Impressionist paintings were meant to be done quickly, in a couple of hours or a day, they were usually small in size and were painted in quick, messy brushstrokes. The Australian group of Impressionists included Tom Roberts, Arthur Streeton, Frederick McCubbin, Charles Conder, Walter Withers and J.N. Sutherland. This group of artists are sometimes referred to as the Heidelberg School, as they sometimes painted together in the Melbourne suburb of Heidelberg, which at that time would have been mostly farmland and bush. One of the most famous events related to the Australian Impressionist movement was the 9x5 Impression exhibition held in Melbourne in 1889. Tom Roberts, Charles Conder and Arthur Streeton exhibited a range of plein air Impressionist works painted on the lids of cigar boxes that measured 9x5 inches, giving the exhibition its name. At the time of Australian Impressionism, the country had been settled by Europeans 100 years earlier and was still in separate colonies, but for the first time, the majority of settlers were born here instead of migrating from Britain. Some people were starting to wonder what a new Australian identity might look like. The Australian Impressionists painted subjects that attempted to forge a new national identity, a visual frame of reference for a new country. Many of their paintings reflect harsh Australian landscapes with big, bright blue skies and the muted tones of red and white rocks and greyish-green gum trees. Notice the division of land and sky, the horizontal planes that show us how vast the landscapes are, the strong depiction of light, and the limited colour palette in some of these works. Many of the artists focus on a culture of hard work in industries like sheep farming and timber cutting, and dramatic scenes in the bush featuring bushrangers, swagmen and pioneer settlers. When there is a human figure in these works, they are in dramatic or dangerous situations that expose some of the harsh realities of rural life. Interestingly, all the Heidelberg artists came from middle-class backgrounds and grew up in urban Melbourne. In fact, 2/3 of all Australians lived in cities. So it's something to think about when Australia's national identity was so based around ideas of the bush. The Australian Impressionists only represented one perspective of Australian identity. What about Aboriginal cultures, the urban Australian, and other minority groups? Is it possible that some of the Australian ideals and visual narratives the Heidelberg artists painted about are still important or represented in our visual culture and national identity now? How have our ideas of Aussie identity changed since the beginnings of Australian art? The Australian Impressionists give us a starting point to reflect on some of these complex ideas.
Created using Powtoon.